Hello and welcome here to the Wine with Jimmy channel. Thank you so much for clicking by. Welcome to a video series here looking at the final video on my Portugal wine series. Now, my videos follow the syllabus of major wine qualifications in the world, and this video is no different. So this is all based on what's called the WSET Level 4. That's a diploma in wine. This video actually, though, is a bit of an add-on. It's actually not included fully in the syllabus. So I am adding this on as an interest because I am fascinated by the wines from this archipelago. It's really quite interesting as an area. So this is the Azores, or as you would find from sort of English speaking, Azores. So this is that group of islands at the Atlantic, differing from Madeira or the Canary Islands, but we're going to talk about its location very soon. Now, if you have a comment, if you have a question, perhaps you have been to the archipelago, perhaps you have tasted wines from this area, lucky you. Please do get in touch with your comments, thoughts, and theories. Okay, let's talk about its location to begin with. Now, just so you are aware, there's a whole series on Portuguese wine. This is series 7, looking at the other parts as per the WSET diplomas. So this series I've gone through Lisbon, the Setúbal Peninsula, Tejo, and now it's on the Azores, the Azores on our final section. So let's begin with our location to start with. So we are talking about the middle of the Atlantic. Now, there is a massive rift zone in the mid-Atlantic that stretches from just north of Iceland all the way down towards Cape Town. In fact, just south of Cape Town, that's right at the southern section of Africa. The seafloor along this fault line is being ripped apart as the Americas, so our America plate, which lies, of course, to the west of our map just there, this slowly drifts away from Europe and Africa at an actual staggering pace of 1 inch per year. So the Azores is in fact this kind of meeting point between the three major plates in this area. So we have, of course, the American plate, the Eurasian plate, and then the African plate. They are moving apart, and this is causing, of course, a lot of tension in terms of our seismic activity in this area. Now, the resulting deep cracks in the Earth's crust have allowed mass quantities of magma to seep out onto the seafloor from profound depths. And in fact, over time, a submarine mountain range as grand as the Rockies has been built up. Now, this is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It's now the longest submarine mountain chain in the world. In a few remote places, the growing mounds of lava have reached the surface to form the islands like we see here for the Azores. So look at others. Iceland, Ascension Island, St. Helena, famous for Napoleon, of course, right at the end of his days. Tristan da Cunha. These are all the nascent archipelagos raised along the mid-Atlantic ridge. The Azores is an autonomous region of Portugal. It consists of 9 island archipelagos between the latitudes of 37 and 39 degree north, 37 to 39 degree north. So this is about the same as the capital of mainland Portugal, Lisbon, and that's around 1,600 kilometers away. Okay, the map in front of you you'll see is in fact those 9 islands. So you'll see actually on the American plate to the west of this map, you'll see Corvo and Flores, and all of the others lie along the fault line between the African and Eurasian plate. So let's talk about that to begin with. I've just highlighted Flores and Corvo on the left of the map. So this is actually sitting on top of the North American plate, and that is in fact drifting eastward. Okay, now this is quite a large stretch of islands in total. We're talking about 600 kilometers. That's about 370 miles separating Santa Maria in the east from Flores in the west. So you'll see right to the southeast of this map, Santa Maria, and then Flores and Corvo sitting towards the west. So the distance between these islands is increasing every year. And now I'm just highlighting the rest of those islands. So these sit between the Eurasian and African plates, and this is along a fault line called the Gloria Fault. Now, in addition to being a highly active zone for volcanism, I always feel like I have to do that when I say this word, this complex triple junction of moving tectonic plates and associated rifts is also one of the most seismically energetic places on Earth. Now, virtually every day, something happens in terms of a minor earthquake, and often as well, there is an occasional major one. Now, statistically, there has been a volcanic eruption on the Azores archipelago every 50 years. And the last one occurred in 1957 on Vello. And that is really telling us that if it's roughly every 50 years, we should have another one soon. So that is just the laws of averages coming to play there. A little bit about the history of the Azores. So the archipelago was discovered between the 14th and 15th centuries, and viticulture, so the grape growing techniques, flourished in this mild and humid Atlantic climate thanks to the very hard work of Carmelite and Franciscan monks, who, of course, making the movement from Western Europe to the New World. So much success was found here that in 1816, André Julien reported in his seminal book Topographie de Tour de Vignoble Conus, so of quite a famous work in the start of the 19th century, that wine was produced on all 9 islands to a total of more than 13 million litres a year. And those wines were then exported to multiple countries on both sides of the Atlantic. Remember, this is quite a strategic location for the reach of these places. So success began in these sort of early centuries. So let's talk around sort of the 16th, 17th, 18th, and into the 19th century. Big success in these places. Lots of influences from multiple European, and you'll see that in fact there are a number of windmills found on the Azores from their Flemish links as well. But not all was smelling of roses. In fact, there were a number of issues forthcoming from the mid 19th century going into the early 20th century. And these would be considered as the American plague. So this is the introduction of powdery mildew, and then later, of course, downy mildew, and eventually phylloxera. So, of course, a lot of our Vitis vinifera, vines imported from Europe to these islands, started to struggle, and in fact, they perished. So they were eventually supplanted by lesser quality American species or hybrids. And this has had a far reaching impact on the archipelago because we don't have the 9 islands producing wine anymore, like mentioned by André Julien at the start of the 19th century. In fact, less than half, so 4 out of the 9 islands today produce grapes for the production of wine. Terceira, Graciosa, Pico, and San Miguel, which we'll have a look at very, very closely soon. Okay, so the climate of the area. So, of course, the archipelago, which is some 1,600 kilometers from Lisbon, which is the capital of Portugal in the south of the country, means that the island chain here is in the middle of the Atlantic. So, of course, the ocean shows all of its unmitigated mightiness here. So, we have cool, wet, and windy climatic conditions, which really has a significant impact on viticulture and overarching styles of wine. Now, the climate on the island of Pico, and you'll actually see viticulture in this picture from the island of Pico with Mount Pico, Portugal's highest mountain range, in the background. This island is strongly influenced by the Azores High, which also influences a large part of Western Europe. You would discuss that, in fact, the Alentejo or the Tejo, the Algarve, and parts of southern Spain are influenced by the Azores High. Now, the typical maritime climate combines the mild temperatures with lower thermal amplitude, heavy rains, especially in winter, and an elevated average humidity. So, of course, being an island chain in the middle of a great ocean, humidity is marked here. Climate variation is also influenced by mountain formation, so we call this orographic formation, and also the geology of the island, plus the distance from the ocean and the exposure to the sun. The frequent mists or fogs are, in fact, sadly favorable to fungal diseases, and antifungal spraying is a necessity across most of the islands. The geology. Now, we've discussed the volcanism of the archipelago. So we know that there is a lot of magma activity, seismic activity, which formulates a lot of the soils here. So we are very much dominated by volcanic activity, but the whole section of islands is a complex triple junction of those moving tectonic plates. And the associated rifts of the Mid Atlantic Ridge and the Gloria Ridge as well means, of course, it really has an intense amount of seismic energy in this area. So we have a lot of the soil here being exposed. Now, I wanted to show you this picture because this is fascinating. Somewhat akin to what we would find from, say, the islands of Lanzarote, which we find in the Canary Islands. So we find here a lot of these amazing stone walls, which are actually crafted from the basalt volcanic rocks, so dug up from the earth and made into walls. These are called coraletas. Coraletas. Now, these are reticulated dry stone walls, and they are important for a double advantage. They protect the vines against salty oceanic winds. So the vines are nestled very much in the protection here. Sometimes these walls are rounded in shape, sometimes more rectangular or square like you see in the picture here. The second advantage is that you must dig up the rock from the ground to build the walls. This creates a loosening of the soil, adding to a little bit more fertility. It means that when vines go in, they're able to actually access the minerals and the rocks that are needed down there. Otherwise, it's far too compact. So, very interesting structure of geology in this area. Now, moving on to the grape varieties, it's quite a complex island chain. There are multiple grape varieties, which some are native or it's sort of local in their origin, and others are international, being introduced from the west of Europe. The most important here is Arinto dos Azores. So This is the most widespread in the Azores, where originally it was known under the name Terrantes de Tercia until 2012, when an official decree changed it to Arinto dos Azores. So the Azores. So Arinto of Azores. Important because there are other Arinto grapes that one finds across Portugal, for example. So, this is a standalone grape variety, unique and different to other Arinto grape varieties found from the mainland. DNA profiling performed in 2016 suggested that Arinto dos Açores has a possible parent offspring relationship with Verdelho. And since Verdelho is much more old, widespread, and ancient, it's likely, therefore, that Verdelho is the parent and the other parent is unknown. This grape variety is the most commonly grown because it is the most adaptable and resistant to the conditions in play with high levels of humidity. So it's a very, very useful grape variety, producing typically more saline and mineral style wines. They can be really quite wonderful. And there is the Manzanita wine from the main production on the Pico island. Next up is Verdelho. So we know that Verdelho is an old and widespread grape variety. It's been grown in the Açores since the 16th century, and it was supposedly introduced from Madeira by a Franciscan monk called Fray Gigante. Now, DNA profiling performed in 1999 confirmed that the island chain of the Azores and Madeira have the same Verdelho, so one and the same. And in 2011, it was suggested that Verdelho is in fact a natural progeny of Sauvignon that we know from places like Jura, for example. And also in 2016, it was suggested that this grape variety Verdelho has a possible parent offspring relationship with Arinto, like we just mentioned, and we think it's the parent, and Torrantes de Pico, which is the next grape variety we shall talk about. Now, from the island here, Verdelho from the Azores tends to be much more fruit laden and floral in comparison to the other native grape varieties. Next up is Torrantes do Pico, as you will see here. This is the least common of the three most planted traditional varieties. So this is the third on my list. It is different from any other Torrantes varieties. Torrantes of somewhere else, it is different. So therefore, it's different to Madeira as well as mainland Portugal. It's unique from the Azores. Now, in 2016, Torrantes do Pico is possibly a parent or offspring relationship with Verdelho, and with the same reasoning that we discussed with Arinto, it's likely because of Verdelho's more ancient stature in the world that this would be offspring of Verdelho. The other parent is likely to be thought Bastardo or Trousseau from France. Interesting. So Verdelho and Bastardo crossing. So this variety is almost extinct because it's very sensitive to rot, it's very low yielding, and it doesn't perform in terms of sugar and alcohol to the other native varieties. So that's the reasoning why it was gradually abandoned by local grape growers. But of course, there has been a refocus on this variety. And from just a handful of vines left, there's said to be now over 4,000 vines spreading across the islands. You will tend to get sort of fresh mineral notes, saltiness, comparable to sort of, they say, like an Alvarinho or even a Riesling in its style. So do look out for this more unusual variety. I wanted to include a red. Now, red is quite uncommon. Most is white production from the Azores. But one I wanted to mention is Saborino. Now, Saborino has synonyms elsewhere. It's called Negramol, certainly on Tenerife of the Canary Islands, Tinta Negramol from Madeira, and Molar from the Dio of Colores, which is found near Lisbon. Now, this is quite interesting, making a bit of a renaissance. They tend to have a ruby to garnet colour with transparency and good texture, elegance, acidity, and also red fruited notes that come through with Saborino. And now just a mention of some of the DOCs in place. Now, in fact, the major production comes under the Vino Regional. I'll mention that in a second. But first of all, the DOCs. Pico, the island towards the south of the archipelago, is a DOC which is mostly for liqueur wines from white grapes. But the region is very well known for those walled plots known as corraletas. They protect the vines against those Atlantic winds. The island of Pico, with the DOC called Pico DOC, is very much dominated by Pico Mountain. It's the highest point of all of Portugal, and it has that very rocky surface made out of black basalt, which the walls are made out of. The other islands produce agricultural produce due to their soils being a little bit more fertile, but Pico, there are very few crops that one can grow beside grapes. You get very low yields here, and it tends to be the island that's kind of the epicenter for viticultural renaissance. Next up is Graciosa. Graciosa is a DOC which actually comes from a separate island. And this is really where we find a combination of fortified wines and table wines. Now, this is, let me just triple check for you. Yes. So this is very, very small in production. The wines tend to be light, fresh, dry, and sort of fruity in production, but very rarely exported. As is the final DOC, which is called the Biscoitus. This DOC is from the highlighted island there of Terceira. Terceira, sorry. And this is the third largest island in the volcanic chain. It's home to Angra do Heroísmo and Heroísmo. This is the historic capital, famous for the Cove of Heroism. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And now, as with the neighboring islands of Graciosa and Pico, this island of Terceira, and more precisely around the town of Biscoitus itself, on the island's northern shores, produces fortified wines. And the name Biscoitus actually comes from the fact that the volcanic rocks here resemble large black cookies or biscuits, which is fantastic, hence where that name comes from. But once again, more local and very rare to get outside of the archipelago. Now, most wine actually is under the Vino Regional designation. You'll see with this one, it says IG Açores on the front of the label. Now, the 9 islands that make up the Azores are autonomous to Portugal, of course, and they are all covered by the Azores VR. This is the kind of catchment classification as one would expect. Here you'll find anything grown. There's something like nearly 40 grape varieties, including international and native varieties. Lots more flexibility under this classification. Well, thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you for going through the wines of the Azores and its many, many pronunciations. Now, please do comment and leave any questions. If you've been to the region, perhaps you have tried the wines, please do get in touch. I have been Jimmy Smith, and if you do find yourself in the UK, come and say hello for a class, a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao, ciao.